a shocking expose on the life and death of the Mary Pinchot Meyer, whose relationship with John Kennedy sheds new light.
She wasn't a secretary. She wasn't a mistress. She was something far more dangerous. Mary Pinchot Meyer moved through Washington's elite circles with quiet power, an artist, a socialite, and the ex-wife of a top CIA official. But behind closed doors, she had a secret relationship with President John F. Kennedy, one that may have involved drugs, political influence, and plans for peace that challenged the Cold War status quo. Weeks after JFK was assassinated, Mary was murdered. Her diary vanished. So what did Mary Pinchot Meyer say about JFK before she died? Before the mystery, before the murder, before the White House secrets, Mary was just Mary, sharp, confident, educated. She met Cord Meyer in 1944. He was a wounded Marine lieutenant with one eye and a dream to unite the world under peace. They shared big ideas, pacifist values, and something rare for that time: mutual respect. They married in April 1945, and by that summer they were already standing at history's front row, attending the UN conference in San Francisco. Cord went as an aide. Mary went as a reporter. That's how it started. Mary worked briefly as an editor for Atlantic Monthly. Then came the kids: Quentin in 1945, Michael in 1947, and Mark in 1950. She put her career on hold, took art classes in New York, and threw herself into family life. Meanwhile, Cord was rising fast. He became president of the United World Federalists in 1947. Mary wrote for their journal. Their home became a meeting place for big minds and bigger ideas, but things changed quickly. As Cold War tensions grew, Cord's dreams of global peace turned into something darker. Communist infiltration inside his own organizations pushed him toward the other side. In 1951, he joined the CIA, recruited by none other than Allen Dulles. And just like that, Mary's world shifted. Washington, D.C. became their new stage. The Meyers weren't just part of Georgetown society. They were deep in the game. Their circle included CIA legends like Frank Wisner, counterintelligence chief James Angleton, and Washington elites like Joseph Alsop and Katharine Graham. Even Washington Post reporter James Truitt and his wife Anne, an acclaimed artist, were close friends. These weren't just names, these were power players, people who shaped the news, people who hid the truth. And then came McCarthy. In 1953, Senator Joseph McCarthy accused Cord of being a communist. The FBI reportedly investigated Mary's past, but Dulles and Wisner went full defense mode. Cord stayed in. By 1954, though, he wasn't happy. He tried to leave the CIA, tried to pivot to publishing, but the doors didn't open. That same year, new neighbors moved in next door in McLean, Virginia, John F. Kennedy and Jackie. It was casual at first, a wave across the yard, small talk. But after both families moved back to Georgetown, Mary and Jackie started taking long walks, the kind where secrets spill, the kind that leave you thinking. Meanwhile, Cord was overseas, running propaganda outlets like Radio Free Europe and managing secret U.S. funding for anti-Soviet initiatives. Mary was back home, raising the boys, painting, writing, and slowly drifting into a world of her own. Then came the tragedy that broke everything. December 18, 1956. Michael, their middle son, just 9 years old, was hit by a car and killed near their house. The loss was crushing. It pulled Mary and Cord together briefly, but the damage was permanent. By 1958, Mary filed for divorce. Now she was alone. 2 surviving sons, a broken past. But something started to shift in her. She set up a studio at her sister Tony's home in Georgetown. Tony was married to Ben Bradley, who was Newsweek's Washington bureau chief at the time, and Mary started painting again. She also started living differently. She got close to abstract painter Kenneth Noland. She formed a friendship with Robert F. Kennedy. She went to parties. She took risks. And according to longtime CIA friend James Angleton, someone was watching her closely, because Angleton admitted he tapped her phone after the divorce. He even took her sons fishing. He was always around, always listening. Why? No one really says, but it matters. Because somewhere in that time, Mary got close to Jack Kennedy. Not as a friend, not as a political donor. This was personal. very personal. She visited the White House in October 1961, and that's when things turned intimate. According to multiple friends, including James Truitt, she told people she was involved with JFK. She even said she was keeping a diary. She wasn't bragging. She was recording something she wanted documented. Years later, the affair became public. First in 1976, when the National Enquirer ran the story. Then the Washington Post followed. And by the time Ben Bradlee wrote about it in A Good Life, it was undeniable. She and the president had a real relationship. But here's where it gets serious. Timothy Leary, the LSD researcher and counterculture icon, said Mary knew him. Said she talked to him about expanding JFK's thinking, about nuclear disarmament, about Cuba, about peace. Leary believed Mary was opening Kennedy's mind to ideas that the military didn't want him to explore. And she wasn't just a fling. According to Kennedy aide Meyer Feldman, JFK talked to her about things that went beyond gossip. Charles Bartlett, a close Kennedy friend, told author Peter Janney years later that Jack was deeply smitten. More than that, he was in love. And that made their relationship dangerous. Because love meant access. Love meant vulnerability. Love meant secrets. Mary wasn't hiding in the shadows. On May 29, 1963, Jackie Kennedy threw a small birthday party for JFK on the presidential yacht Sequoia. It was his last birthday. Mary was on the guest list. And then, 1 month before he was assassinated, JFK wrote her a letter. It was never sent, but it was kept by his secretary, Evelyn Lincoln, and in 2016 it sold at auction for $89,000. It was handwritten, direct, emotional. He wanted her to visit. He wanted her to say yes. He knew it was irrational. He didn't care. He signed it J. But Mary Pinchot Meyer never got the chance to respond to that letter, at least not the way she might have wanted. Because less than a year after Kennedy's assassination, she was dead too. It happened on October 12, 1964, on a clear Monday afternoon in Georgetown. That morning, she finished a painting in her studio, then stepped out for her usual walk along the Chesapeake and Ohio Canal towpath, a quiet stretch she visited daily. She didn't carry a purse or ID. She never expected danger, but danger was waiting. Around midday, a mechanic named Henry Wiggins was working on a stalled car near Canal Road. Everything seemed normal until he heard a woman's voice yelling for help. Then came 2 sharp gunshots. Wiggins looked up and saw a black man in a light jacket and dark cap standing over the body of a white woman. That woman was Mary. She had been shot once in the head, right at the left temple, and once in the back. The wounds were clean, precise, and instantly fatal. An FBI forensic expert later testified that the dark halos around the wounds showed they had been fired at close range, maybe even point blank. The medical examiner said the killer had to be highly trained. This wasn't random. This wasn't sloppy. This was practiced. Roughly 40 minutes later, a D.C. detective named John Warner spotted a soaking wet man walking about a quarter mile from the scene. He wasn't running. He wasn't hiding. But he was acting strange, and when police questioned him, he couldn't explain what he was doing near the canal. His name was Ray Crump, a black man with no weapon, no clear story, and no obvious motive. Still, based on Wiggins's description and Crump's vague answers, police arrested him on the spot at 1:15 p.m. Then something even stranger happened. A full 2 hours before police publicly identified Mary as the murder victim, before her family had been told, before any names were released, CIA official Wistar Janney called Ben Bradlee, Mary's brother-in-law. Janney told Bradlee he'd heard a radio report about a woman shot and killed on the towpath, and based on the description, he believed it might be Mary. But here's the part that makes people pause. Mary hadn't carried ID that day. Police didn't know who she was until well after 3:45 p.m. Bradlee himself didn't find her purse until much later that night, hours after he identified her body at the morgue. So how did Janney know so early? How could anyone have known who the victim was before even the police did? Bradlee recalled in his memoir, A Good Life, that he hadn't listened to the radio before Janney called. He wasn't even aware there had been a murder. He left his Newsweek office in a rush, went home to Georgetown, saw neighbors crowding around, and drove to the morgue with a friend. There, he identified Mary's body. It was a moment he never forgot. Meanwhile, back at the station, police booked Crump based on two key witness statements: Henry Wiggins, who saw a man over the body, and Army Lieutenant William Mitchell, who came forward the next day and said he saw a black man trailing a white woman on the path. Both gave similar descriptions of the man's clothing, but neither could positively identify Crump in court. In fact, Mitchell couldn't even say with confidence that Crump was the man he'd seen, and there were problems with the timeline too. There was no gun. None of Mary's blood was found on Crump's clothes, and according to FBI reports later revealed by author Peter Janney, no forensic evidence tied Crump to the scene. None. Despite the fact that Mary had bled from a head wound, Crump's shirt and pants were spotless. That FBI report wasn't given to the defense. It was buried, just like so many other pieces of this case. But defense attorney Dovie Johnson Roundtree saw through the gaps. She dug into the evidence, or lack of it. At trial, she pointed out that Crump was significantly smaller than the man Wiggins described. Crump was 5 inches shorter and about 50 pounds lighter. She also discovered that Crump had an alibi. He'd been with a woman, someone he knew well, at the time of the murder. But that woman was married. She refused to testify out of fear her husband would find out. Then she vanished before trial. When the case finally went to court in July 1965, Judge Howard Corcoran ruled that Mary's private life could not be discussed in front of the jury. Her CIA connections, her relationship with JFK, the diary she allegedly kept, none of it was allowed. Not even Roundtree could get access to Mary's full background. She later said it was as if Mary had only existed on that path, that one day, in that 1 hour. In the end, Crump was acquitted of all charges. The jury couldn't convict him with no evidence, no motive, no murder weapon, and no clear witness identification. He walked free on July 29, 1965. But even then, the police weren't done with him. Right after the verdict, they escorted Crump to the edge of the city and told him to never come back to Washington. No explanation, no paperwork, just get out. Later, some argued that Crump's later arrests and violence proved he was capable of murder. But Roundtree believed that trauma from his 8-month imprisonment, not guilt, changed him. She stood by her defense until the end of her life. And when Peter Janney revisited the case decades later, he found even more troubling details, like the fact that police started searching for Crump's jacket 15 minutes before they even arrested him, or that another unidentified black man may have been at the crime scene. So what really happened that day on the towpath? Pinchot Meyer, in his 1982 autobiography, said he believed Mary was killed in a sexual assault gone wrong. He didn't question the police findings. He said he rejected the conspiracy theories, but others didn't. Because Mary hadn't been just another woman. She had once been deeply involved with the President of the United States. She had been connected to the CIA through her ex-husband, her friends, and her phone being tapped. She had been close to people who worked in shadows, and now she was dead, and the story didn't add up. She had told people she was keeping a diary that reportedly held details about her relationship with JFK, her views on politics, peace, and possibly even drugs. After her death, James Angleton, the CIA's top counterintelligence officer, was caught breaking into her home, searching for that diary. Ben Bradley confirmed that. Why would the CIA want her diary unless it held something dangerous? That's where everything about Mary Pinchot Meyer shifts. Her death was already suspicious, the investigation already flawed. But when you add the fact that one of the highest-ranking CIA figures was caught trying to retrieve her personal writings just hours after her murder, you start to see that someone, somewhere, was scared of what she might have written. And they had good reason to be. Because the truth about what Mary said, what she might have been ready to reveal about John F. Kennedy, began to take shape not in courtrooms or government files, but in a tabloid. On March 2, 1976, the National Enquirer dropped a bombshell. James Truitt, a former Washington Post reporter and close friend of Mary's, claimed she had a 2-year affair with JFK and regularly visited him in the White House. He said it wasn't just romantic, it was intimate, political, and according to him, experimental. Truitt alleged that Mary had been chauffeured by the Secret Service to the White House and that she and Kennedy met there as often as 2 or 3 times a week. Sometimes they had dinner, sometimes drinks. But one night, Truitt said, she brought marijuana, and after they smoked together, she reportedly told Kennedy she'd get him something stronger. According to the article, she said it wasn't like cocaine but offered to find some. That detail alone pushed the story from scandalous to dangerous. Drugs inside the White House. A secret relationship with a woman who wanted to influence the president's thinking. It was everything the intelligence community would want buried. The Enquirer's story made waves. Truitt stood by his words in interviews with the Washington Post, saying Mary had confided in him and that he kept detailed notes of what she told him. He even named JFK aides David Powers and Timothy Reardon as occasional dinner guests during those secret meetings. Still, others quickly moved to discredit him. Some pointed to his history of mental illness. Others called him unstable. Even Mary's sister Toni claimed she was misquoted by the Enquirer and never confirmed those details. But years later, Ben Bradlee, Toni's husband and one of the most respected journalists in American history, confirmed the affair and the existence of the diary in his 1995 memoir, A Good Life. He admitted that after the murder, he and Toni learned about the diary only when Mary's friend Ann Truitt called from Japan, warning them that it needed to be found. They rushed to Mary's art studio behind their Georgetown home, and there they found Angleton, tools in hand, trying to break in. They found the diary 2 days later. According to Bradlee, it did indeed document her relationship with JFK, and after reading it, they made a collective decision to hand it over to Angleton. That decision sparked decades of controversy. Bradlee didn't tell the police about the diary. He didn't mention it during Crump's murder trial. He said the diary was private. But prosecutors later said that if they had known about it, it could have changed the case. Defense attorney Dovie Roundtree said her entire strategy would have shifted if she had been told that the CIA's top spy had broken into the victim's studio. Even the lead detective admitted he would have been furious had he known. The truth about Mary's diary had been deliberately kept from the court. What was in those pages that made the CIA act so fast? That made powerful men move so quietly? Then came another twist. In his memoir Flashbacks, LSD researcher Timothy Leary wrote that he had known Mary personally. According to him, she had visited him at Harvard and asked to be trained in how to guide psychedelic sessions. She wasn't trying to throw parties. She wanted to use psychedelics with powerful men to spark peace, not war. She told Leary that there were those in Washington who wanted to weaponize drugs for espionage, but her mission was the opposite, to open minds, not control them. And though she never told him Kennedy's name directly, years later, after the Enquirer article, Leary realized Mary had been referring to her relationship with the president all along. Leary also claimed that after JFK's assassination, Mary called him in tears, saying they couldn't control the president anymore, that he was changing too fast, and now it was all being covered up. Some dismissed this story. Leary was known for exaggeration, but others, including Mary's biographers, couldn't ignore that her trips to see Leary aligned almost perfectly with her known visits to the White House. So what did Mary say about JFK before she died? She told people he was changing. She said he was listening. She told close friends and possibly wrote in her diary that she believed he was pulling away from the Cold War mindset. She talked about peace, about disarmament, about shifting the power structures that ruled Washington. She didn't brag about the affair. She saw it as something deeper, emotional, political, transformational. She believed JFK was turning a corner in his presidency, and she believed he was ready to take big risks for peace. And then he was gone. And then so was she. and every attempt to uncover the truth about their connection, about her death, about her words, always seemed to end in silence. Missing files, burned diaries, stories denied or discredited. Thanks for watching. If this story intrigued you, hit like, subscribe to the channel, drop your thoughts in the comments, and turn on notifications so you don't miss what's coming next.